From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. It's that time of the year again. It's like top of the pops for the super rich. And in at number one, we have...
At the top of the Sunday Times rich list this year, Gopi Hinduja and his family with estimated wealth of £35.304 billion.
How do you even make sense of numbers like that?
It basically means if you take the view that the life expectancy in the UK is roughly 82 years, to spend that sort of money, you would have to spend more than £1 million a day for your whole life.
Sorry, what? £1 million a day until you die? That would buy you a lot of butter, even at today's prices. But it turns out the super rich have found better uses for their money.
Billionaires will spend money on all sorts of things, ranging from super yachts, private jets. But this year in the Sunday Times Rich List, we have an extraordinary article about a place where you can chill out and have good therapy for £50,000 a week if you want.
We get the lowdown on the lives and the fears of the super rich from a man with surely one of the coolest jobs in journalism.
It may sound like I spend my life jumping from one super yacht to the next. It's not really like that, to be honest. 90% of what I do is trawling through very tedious sets of accounts, shareholdings in public companies, time on the land registry, looking at ownership, very dull statistical financial stuff. You have to have quite a high boredom threshold for this kind of work.
Oh, but the results are anything but boring. Who are the super rich now? How do they make their money? And what do they make of Rachel Reeves and her supposedly pro-growth agenda? The story today, the Sunday Times Rich List 2025. Are the super rich fleeing Britain?
I'm Robert Watts. I compile the Sunday Times Rich List.
Rob, how long have you been doing the Rich List, and how did the process of doing it this year compare to other years?
I've been compiling the Sunday Times Rich List for 10 years now, which almost makes me a rookie because my predecessor, Philip Berries, did it for 28 years. This year was a lot trickier than any year we've had previously, harder in fact than COVID, where we pretty much had a rich list ready to go, and then the pandemic struck and the people on the list, their finances were in a very different shape a month into the pandemic than they were at the start. With this year, it's all been about Trump and the fact that the volatility in global stock markets has really changed the wealth of these people.
In the last hour, President Trump has announced sweeping tariffs on goods imported into the US from around the world.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them.
Well, goods from the UK will be hit with 10% tariffs.
Well, that was the opening bell on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones down nearly 3%. Stock markets around the world have been in free fall since the tariffs were announced.
If you imagine it, if you've got 90% of someone's wealth, if it's based on a share price of a public company on the stock market, that share price has dropped by 10% one day and then gone up by 10% the next day when it looked as if tariffs weren't going to be so bad and then dropped again, then their wealth is constantly changing. So that's meant that some people we have had to value 2, 3, 4 times, and that's not been straightforward.
I can imagine. And it just give us a sense of, some examples of how that's changed. I mean, is this tariffs? Is this Trump's impact on the markets? What's made the real difference?
It's a bit of both. So Jim Ratcliffe's firm, Ineos, for example, pushes a lot of its chemicals and other products into the United States. Obviously, it now looks like those products will be subject to 25% tariffs. Now they're not in scope for the deal that Keir Starmer announced last week. So that has a major effect on the value of that business, and therefore we would value that business at less than we would have done had tariffs not exist. And poor Sir Jim, he was having a fairly difficult year already. The debt of his company has increased. It posted a loss last year. So we were already quite bearish on the company, quite sort of cautious about the value. And we were always dropping the value before Donald Trump walked into the White House, but that got significantly worse. Another example, a firm like Glencore, which is a big commodities trading business, very much affected by tariffs. Alex Baird, who was one of the, I love this phrase, billionaire boys club, one of the early guys into Glencore, who made a lot of money and was the sort of the poster boy of that business, and a member of, called by the tabloids a billionaire boys club. Well, he has lost his billionaire status because the share price of Glencore has fallen very sharply in the post-Trump world. As a result, he loses his billionaire status.
Are there a lot of people on the list who've been affected by either tariffs or the state of the markets after Trump?
It's such a good question, Manveen, and we're really at the start of this. But yes, it's far wider than you initially think, really, because you think, take a business like Gymshark, startup by Ben Francis, this great, fast-growing gymwear business. Roughly 40% of their stock goes to the States. I didn't realise it was as much as that, to be honest. And they warned publicly of the effect of, and they phrased it quite carefully, macroeconomic instability or something like that to go. But yes, that is a business who we wouldn't have automatically thought, yes, that will be affected severely by Trump's tariffs, but a higher degree of its sales are now in the States than we thought. But it's even broader than that, because some of the rich listers are talking about, big cuts in the value of their personal shareholdings. So not the shareholdings in their companies, not the value of their business, but in their personal stock market portfolios because of the general stock market slide.
And Rob, just to complicate things even more, it's not just Trumponomics that are changing the shape of the rich list that you compile. It's also Trump himself, because you have had an influx of Americans arriving in the UK to add to your list who probably wouldn't be here if he hadn't been elected.
Yes, you're absolutely right. We count two types of people on the rich list. We count British people wherever they are in the world, and we also count people from overseas if we're confident that they're here in the UK. And Ellen DeGeneres, one of the queens of US TV, moved to Cotswolds in the last year, apparently, so they say. Not terribly enamored with the new resident in the White House, and keen to make a home in England. And as a result, we count her on the Sunday Times rich list this year, and she is one of our new entries this year. Will she say what? We'll wait and see. We've had people from America before. Will we see more to come? It's interesting. All the chat at the moment is about people leaving the UK, but it seems we are picking up some from overseas still.
Well, we'll come on to the people who are leaving in a moment. Before we do, though, just talk us through some of the other new entries on the list this year.
Yeah, it's a real mix, actually. For someone who likes data like me, I'm quite heartened that there's a married couple from Suffolk, the O'Hares, who have just sold their data business to the big US fund manager BlackRock for north of £2 billion. So they make it onto the list. We're confident enough that Christopher Nolan, the brilliant film director, and his wife Emma Thomas, from the fees that they garner from Oppenheimer, that they make it onto the list as well. There's another celebrity couple who we were quite surprised to see on, Claudia Schiffer and her film-producing husband Matthew Vaughn, best known, I suppose, for the Kingsman films, if you watch them. They make it on as well. But as ever with the rich list, we would just see such a wide spectrum of people. Yes, there are a couple of young AI entrepreneurs on the list. There's a guy making a lot of money from electric vehicles, automated sort of driving, battery technology, but we also see people making money from selling a lot of gym kit. We see a lot of people selling, agricultural machinery, makeup. It seems it's almost a mentality as much as anything to be able to, go hard and build a very successful business. Because at the end of the day, you would need £350 million to get onto the rich list this year, which is staggering.
That's the baseline. And is it true that one of the new entrants is there partly because you managed to play Cupid? Is this right? The rich list is now being used as a dating service almost.
I think I know who you're talking about. Yes, I was slightly surprised about this. I didn't realise this is what my dry boring numbers are used for. But Georgia Toffolo, the reality TV star and entrepreneur, married earlier this year James Watt, a brood dog. Because James Watt sort of set up that fast-growing craft beer and has been out and about and sort of making sort of political pronouncements about we should all sort of work harder and be more ambitious and so forth. Anyway, a TikTok video that has been sent my way shows them sort of teasing each other while on holiday in the Maldives, of course, whereas teasing each other about their various crimes, as couples sometimes do. And he accuses her of having a certain type and choosing from the Sunday Times rich list, which a partner, which I suppose has been right. They are now married.
Suspect says she doesn't have a type, but she chooses from the Sunday Times rich list.
Yeah, I wasn't quite aware my work was being used for that kind of thing.
Good work, Rob. I think that should get you a bonus.
Oh, thank you.
Meanwhile, despite the tariffs and the changing markets, there are some people who've been on the list before who have worked their way up. Tell us a bit about some of those success stories.
Yes, the government have been keen to talk about a pro-growth agenda. I'm not sure they necessarily expected us to have a billionaire asylum hotelier. This is a guy called Graham King, who 25 years ago was on Candy Island running caravan parks and minicab firms and organising teen discos. And now has built up a business called Clear Springs, which last year had revenues of £1.8 billion, nearly 1,000% more than 3 years. From doing what? Well, for housing, feeding and transporting asylum seekers, refugees, just across the southeast and Wales. So this isn't a national company by any stretch of the imagination. It's a hugely profitable business, £120 million of profit last year, up 60% on the previous year. And when we came to value it, using our rich list methodology, we got to a valuation of more than £1 billion from the business. So I checked it with people in that industry. They agreed. He owns all the shares. And he's quite a character, I think it's fair to say. Posting online his holidays overseas, spends a lot of time in Monaco. I think sometimes we do get asked about why we do the rich list, and a big part of it is because we know our readers find self-made entrepreneurs often energizing, inspiring, that we should recognize these people's achievements. But another part of the rich list, the reason why we do it, is because we think it's an important part of a functioning democracy that we know where wealth lies and where it's being accumulated. And I struggle to think of a better example of that than Graham King, because this is public money, this is taxpayers' money. Last year, £1.8 billion of public money flowed into that company's accounts. That is money that could have gone to the NHS. It didn't. It went to this rather mysterious, quite quirky entrepreneur who isn't publicly accountable. Now, I think wherever you are on what your feelings are about immigration, I think this is the sort of story that does pose the question, hang on, is this something that the government should really be handling in-house now, rather than providing a get-rich-quick scheme for ambitious entrepreneurs?
And he's not the only one on the list who's benefited.
You're absolutely right. There's another guy further down the list called Alex Langsom. Intriguing, again, very, very quiet, in his mid-80s now. And interestingly, was a refugee to this country himself. He was born just before World War II, when the Nazis annexed Austria, his homeland. He and his family fled Austria and came to the UK. They were held in a detention centre on the Isle of Man for some time, and then started as a estate agent first, and then got into hotels. You might have stayed in one of his hotels at Britannia if you come across a chain. That chain, he also owns the Pontins holiday parks. And a lot of his hotels, dozens of them, have been handed over to the Home Office to house asylum seekers. Now, he's very interesting because he makes the sort of, or people close to him have made the counter argument to me. Well, look, he's solving a problem here. He's getting wealthy by solving a problem for the government here. The government needs to house these people somewhere. It was the Home Office who came to Mr. Langson and said, could you house people waiting for their asylum application to be processed in your hotels? And he did so. readers will be in different and listeners will be in different places on just how much money it's possible to make from these contracts.
If you're enjoying this episode of The Story, you can listen to more by subscribing to the podcast. It's completely free, and we'll put a link below in the description box for different ways you can follow us. Rob, you were explaining earlier how this has been the hardest list to compile, partly because of Donald Trump, because of the tariffs he's introduced, because of the chaos on the markets that have followed. Is that something that a lot of the people you were talking to on the list were keen to talk about? Is that something that they are worried about?
We did talk about Trump a little bit. There's a bit of that, yes, without a doubt, but not nearly as much hostility towards the White House as there was to Westminster.
Oh, really?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, I expected the non-dom, the row over non-doms to sort of simmer on. We knew that non-dom status was looking to be axed. If you remember, it was Jeremy Hunt, while he was the last Conservative Chancellor, who initially mooted the idea, and that was causing ructions last year. And already last year, we were getting concern from these sort of wealthy, super rich who'd come to London, who'd come to the UK in recent years, that this would make them want to leave. But here's the thing. The key thing that has been different is that has continued, but there are a series of, to be honest, quite arcane tax measures that were announced in the budget that have taken the level of anger and frustration into a far different level.
We need to drive growth, promote entrepreneurship, and support wealth creation, while raising the revenue required to fund our public services and restore our public finances. Today, we will increase the lower rate of capital gains tax from 10 to 18% and the higher rate from 20 to 24%. I have always said that if you make Britain your home, you should pay your taxes here too. So today, I can confirm we will abolish the non-dom tax regime. Remove the outdated concept of domicile from the tax system from April 2025. We will reform agricultural property relief and business property relief. From April 2026, the first £1 million of combined business and agricultural assets will continue to attract no inheritance tax at all. But for assets over £1 million, inheritance tax will apply with a 50% relief at an effective rate of 20%.
There are three types of quite grumpy, wealthy people at the moment. And we're talking about a lot of the rich list component here. And some of the things that you'll read about in our introduction to rich list this year, the questions are pretty strong. So there's the global super rich who come to the UK, some of them who feel they have to go because the axing of non-dom status. I think a lot of the coverage is focused on these people being taxed on their global income by the UK now, and that being the issue. Actually, the thing some of them are getting much more anxious about is the idea that with the end of non-dom status, when they die, their entire estate all over the world, assets all over the world, properties in India or America, wherever, and their businesses, that will be subject to UK inheritance tax. So on that basis, a lot of them feel, I haven't got any choice, but they've got to leave. So you would have seen Lakshmi Mittal, the Indian metal magnate who topped the Sunday Times rich list, I think, for 5 successive years. He has named this as his reason for going. Christian Anger Mayer, less well known, been living in London for about 5-6 years. He describes the axing of non-dom status to us as the death blow for London as a sort of international hub for the wealthy. He's off. He's moved to Switzerland. I won't have him in the rich list next year because he's just not here enough anymore and he's offloading his UK assets. So there's that global super rich. And then there are two other types, really. There's the sort of age-old family businesses who've been caught up in an inheritance tax raid, as they call it. which is very similar. If you cast your mind back to Jeremy Clarkson's protest about farming, it's very, very similar. There's a very, very similar tax change that's going to hit these age-old family businesses, which people believe, including Sir James Dyson. We've got a guy called Tony Langley who's got very strong views about this, a Midlands billionaire industrialist who describes this as a sort of hammer blow for family firms and will lead to the breakup of these firms.
And Rob, this is a change that hasn't had as much publicity as the difference in farming inheritance tax. Is this basically an exemption that used to exist that has just been taken off?
You got it. That's exactly it. So essentially what you could do under the old system, when you were passing shares in privately owned companies down to the next generation, you could largely do that at 3 of inheritance tax. What Rachel Reeves has said is that she wants to introduce a tax of 20% from the heirs of those businesses. Now, the feeling is that these heirs, these people do not have the money in the business to just take it out and give it to HMRC. So the fear is that a lot of these businesses will either be sold or parts of the businesses will be sold. Who will buy them? Well, the theory is private equity who will come in, they'll ramp the business full of debt. As a result, the corporation tax take will go down. Private equity have a track record of perhaps reducing headcount. Perhaps a lot of people will lose their jobs. And so it's phrases like selling the family silver, ripping up the fabric of the economy. These are very, very strong phrases and very, very angry people. And as I say, far in excess of the anger than I've encountered since doing the rich list, but far more than
really
the Trump.
And there's a third category, you said, who were really annoyed. Tell us about them.
Yes, and it's quite surprising, really. The sort of the younger entrepreneurs, the young techies. So Barney Hussey-Yao, who's one of the people in our young rich list, 40 under 40 list, who feels that the changes to entrepreneurs relief, basically the tax you pay when you sell your business, or the relief on the tax that you pay is being pared back, and the capital gains tax is going up. And there are other people on the rich list who think this, but I think it's really telling that the young entrepreneurs are kicking off about this, because generally speaking, I'm often particularly interested in politics or keen to talk about it in the past. But these are people, and I mentioned by Hussey-Yao, the young techie who's on our under 40s list, is saying very publicly, this is the reason why lots of young British techie entrepreneurs are going to move to the States, because it's difficult to keep these people here. But why? Well, because one of the things about the rich list is that you look at these people, a lot of these people have an appetite to risk that normal people don't have, I don't have, that they're prepared to, mortgage for house and go for it, or, roll the dice, quit the day job and go for it and try and start up a business. And they do that often because they're judging the risk against the reward, and they're thinking, yeah, it may all fall apart, but the incentive of being able to one day sell my business for £100 million, I'm going to do it. What he articulated, and what some of these people are very concerned about, and as I say, it is people across the rich list, is that the UK does not represent a good deal anymore, but it's just not worth rolling the dice, because the reward you get for your risk is not big enough. Why not go to Dubai? Why not Singapore? Why not go to, the States? We are losing people in a way that I'm not certain that Westminster truly understands. We quoted David Sullivan, the West Ham shareholder, publisher and property man, adamant that there's going to be a nasty surprise when people start to realise how many people have left the UK in the last year. There is truth in that. We're seeing it on the rich list. We are seeing a few people who definitely have gone. I was most concerned, though, about the younger entrepreneurs saying, don't want to build my business here, I'm going to go off. James Stevens, a mid-40s entrepreneur who makes his debut on the rich list this year, sold his office supplies business in the UK. He now lives in Dubai and he's set up a property company out there. He's euphoric about life out there and very, very positive about it, and says that actually it's got a lot better, and that 5 years ago Perhaps it wasn't great. Perhaps the schools weren't great. Perhaps there wasn't many people out there who he knew. But that is changing. And the story of the rich list really in the past 2 or 3 years has been an end to a sort of golden period for the super rich, where we were seeing record numbers of billionaires year after year. And now we're seeing a very different mood and a very different time. And part of that competitiveness of overseas markets is part of it.
If you could sort of guess roughly in terms of the proportion of millionaires and billionaires who you think will be affected by this, who you think will actually leave, I mean, is it possible to put any numbers on it?
It's a project I actually want to do over the summer because it's very, very difficult to be precise. I mean, my sense actually is that we see less of it on the rich list than you might think. So yes, I can name someone like Steve Parkin, who was a rich list regular for many years. I can see from his records at Companies House, he lives there in Jersey and has all the tax advantages that go with that, as well as the nice beaches. Parkin will stay on the Sunday Times rich list because he's British and we count British citizens wherever we are. I've had some quite interesting conversations with wealth managers in the city in the last 2 months who are talking much more in terms of, oh, Robert, it's the people, not on your list because they can actually afford to pay the higher taxes often. It's the people who are earning, if you're earning north of £500,000 a year, effectively 45 to 50% of your income is disappearing in tax. Why not go to Dubai? You can work remotely. Why not go to Switzerland? You can work remotely. Perhaps you can fly into the UK. And I think people should be slightly skeptical. And I was until 2 years, very skeptical about whether the super rich just jump on a plane and get out when taxes go up. I'm very confident there's something very significant going on in terms of people leaving, but I think it's slightly below rich list, that 350 million you need to do. Interesting, Gopi Hinduja, the guy at the top, he's staying put. So not everyone will go, but there are people going, and there are a lot of people talking about it, and I expect more to go. We will see more high profile names. I mean, Lakshmi Mittal, that will probably be the wealthiest person we've lost if that transpires.
If that happens. And as you were saying, you think people in Westminster haven't really woken up to this. Just explain why they should. I mean, what would it mean if there was a huge exodus? I mean, how much do these particularly wealthy people represent in tax?
28% of our income tax in the UK is paid by the top 1% of earners. I mean, there is a perception that the wealthy pay no tax, and certainly we can find examples of that. But we also find a lot of examples of wealthy people who do pay a lot of tax. So for the last 7 years, we've been compiling that Sunday Times tax list, which we started almost not to sort of settle an argument, but almost to investigate this whole shooting area of do the rich pay tax. And we find more than 10 people a year who contribute £100 million on their own to the public finances. And I mean, to get on that list now, you need to have contributed £10 million to the public finances over the past year. And we find 100 people who do that without a problem. Everyone that goes, yes, they take that contribution potentially of tax with them, but often these people also do a lot more than that. They create jobs. We're talking about people with the guts and gumption to start businesses that employ people not just by the dozen or the 100, but often by the 1,000. And we kind of need those people.
It's still a wait and see. I guess a lot of people listening, when they hear those extraordinary figures, the sort of numbers you need to even get onto the rich list, there will be some people, as you say, who not necessarily think good riddance, but sort of think, perhaps it's time they were paying inheritance tax in the same way that other people who live here do. If people who earn far less have to pay a huge proportion of the money they inherit in tax, shouldn't people who just have a hell of a lot more have to do the same?
I mean, we're all in different places as personally, aren't we, in terms of what we consider, a fair share, the right share to be. Currently, our tax take as a proportion of our national income is the highest level since just after World War II. And yet a lot of us are dissatisfied with the quality of our public services at the same time. So something does seem to be broken in some way, doesn't it? But there'll be people listening to this who look at the rich list and think these people are part of a solution, or should be, and we need to keep them here so they're creating businesses that create jobs and contribute to the public finances. And there are other people who will take the view that these people are part of a problem because they're not paying enough and they're not contributing enough and they should be paying more. So it's a complex relationship, isn't it?
And Rob, for you, this is such an epic job. It does take a year. The rich list is dead. Long live the rich list. Presumably you're now already working on compiling the next one.
It is like painting the fourth bridge, really. It never stops. No, I mean, there are accounts that have been filed since I finished this year's compilation, which would go in for next year's. Absolutely right.
Given everything that we've talked about, I mean, how different do you think the next one will be? Is the UK still going to be somewhere very rich people want to live?
I think it's not what it was. Just look at London now, and you go to these places where the super rich, where you do find them sort of hanging out in restaurants at Mayfair, talk to the wealth managers who have offices in the city, and it does feel different than it did. I mean, there was this extraordinary billionaire boom where low interest rates boosted the asset values of these people. They felt better. A lot of overseas money was coming into the UK. The competition hadn't quite got their act together. And now it does feel different. I don't see that changing in the next year at all. I think we've got more of this to come. The brilliant David Smith, the economics editor of the Sunday Times for many years, once read a book called Something Will Turn Up, basically making the point that Britain's economic history is a story of that things turn up. And North Sea oil just turned up. The Thatcher Revolution just seemed to turn up. And it feels like we're waiting for the next thing to turn up, because if it doesn't, the outlook doesn't look great.
That was Robert Watts, the keeper of the Sunday Times Rich List. You can find all the details of the list and many of the people in it online at thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Rosie Stopher, the executive producer was Molly Guinness, and sound design and theme composition were by Maula Seto. If you want to get in touch with us, we're at thestory@thetimes.com. Do drop us a line. And if you can, do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If nobody else reads it, I promise we will. Thanks so much for listening. See you again soon.